you guys, Johnny Banjo with the Banjophile. Thank you for stopping by. So in a recent video, I showed you how I change a banjo head. And it was on this banjo here. And during that video, I mentioned that it was going to look odd because it was going to appear that I was putting the exact same head back on that I had just taken off. And that wasn't the case, that the difference between the heads was actually that the crown height. The one I was putting on had a higher crown height than the one I had taken off. And I said that it was a little beyond the scope of that video to talk about why crown height matters and why it changed on this particular banjo. So I'm making this video to go into that a little bit more in depth. So the history of why this banjo needed a different crown height. This banjo is a Vega Senator made by Deering. And you might say, well, it doesn't look like a Vega Senator. And you're right, it doesn't. I've modified it. The Vega Senator, as the way it's supplied, has hardware that's a little bit cheap for what you pay for the banjo, frankly. It has a tension hoop that's grooved rather than notched, and so flat hooks to go with that grooved tension hoop rather than round hooks. I much prefer notched tension hoop and round hooks, and I really wanted this raw brass look. So I swapped all the hardware on my Vega Senator with this nice raw brass hardware. Most of it came from Rickard Banjos and Balsam Banjo Works. So that was nice. And I also wanted to change the head. I wanted to put on this glossy black head that I thought would complement the brass hardware really nicely. And without thinking, I ordered all the parts at the same time. And I ordered a head with the crown height that Vega recommends. They recommend the medium crown height for all their banjos, that Deering recommends for all the Vega banjos. And I wasn't thinking about it, but I was changing the hardware. And that means that the crown height needs might change. And indeed it did. Now, why would it matter? Well, like I said, the hardware I put on, this tension hoop actually came from Rickard, and the hardware I put on is somewhat nicer than the hardware I took off. And when I went to play the banjo after I changed the hardware, I noticed something was a little bit wrong immediately, even on open strings. Give it a listen. I don't know if you can hear that. It's very, very subtle, but something sounds just a little bit off. But then as I started playing up the neck a little more, you hear it getting a little worse, right? At this point you can hear that at the 5th fret, you can hear it sounds metallic. And as I go up the neck, at the midpoint, clearly the string is striking something that's muting it. So why is that happening? Why is that suddenly happening? Because I changed the hardware. Well, what's actually happening is the tension hoop is a little higher, is a little taller. The new tension hoop is a little taller than the one I took off. The nicer Rickard tension hoop's a little taller than the stock Vega tension hoop that came with the banjo. And so it's actually now slightly intruding into the path of the strings where the neck joins the rim. The tension hoop is high enough that it's getting into the path of the strings. So let's look at the height of the two tension hoops in comparison. On the right is the old stock tension hoop that came with the Vega Senator. And on the right is the new one, the replacement that I got from Balsam Banjo Works, which is a bit of a nicer one. And you could see that it's a little bit taller. Not a lot, just a little bit. And that height difference is enough to bring the tension hoop into the path of the strings when it's installed on the banjo. The problem is not that I didn't tension the head enough. The head is fully tensioned, and I've checked that with a drum dial. So the problem isn't how much I've ratcheted down these brackets and how much I pulled the tension hoop down. It's pulled down as much as it needs to be, and of course I've checked that, and I tried adjusting it. In fact, the head's probably a little too tight. So it's not that, it's that the tension hoop itself is just too high. So what do I do? How do I fix that? Can I not use this tension hoop? No, I can use it. The way to fix that is to adjust the crown height of the head. So what is crown height anyway? Crown height is just an indicator of how tall the head is. It's the vertical distance from the surface of the head to the collar. Here's a side-by-side comparison of my old medium crown head on the left and the new high crown head on the right. It's a very subtle difference, but you can just barely get a sense that the head on the right is a tiny bit taller. To be specific, a high crown is 1/16 of an inch taller than a medium crown, and a low crown is 1/16 inch shorter than a medium crown. Now that may not sound like much, and in many cases that 1/16 of an inch truthfully won't make any difference either way. But with musical instruments, sometimes a very small change in alignment does matter. The crown height determines how far down the rim the collar of the head will sit. That in turn determines how far down the tension hoop will travel. It makes a difference because you don't want the head and the tension hoop to sit so low that they run out of room and start to hit the shoes before you can bring the head up to tension. And conversely, you don't want them to sit so high that the top edge of the tension hoop starts to encroach into the path of the strings. That's the problem I was having. So to get the tension hoop to sit lower on the rim, I needed a head with a higher crown. A higher crown provides more distance between the collar of the head and the head's surface. Here's a view of how high the top edge of the tension hoop reaches above the surface of the medium crown head, and here's how high it reaches above the surface of the high crown head. Notice that it's now sitting lower. So the entire tension hoop has to sit somewhere within the vertical window of space defined by the path of the strings at the upper limit and the top of the bracket shoes at the lower limit. The crown height of the head determines where in that vertical window the tension hoop will ultimately sit, with a higher crown height causing the tension hoop to sit lower. Having a tension hoop that's higher than the surface of the head is desirable. It keeps the hooks from contacting the head, keeps the hooks away from the head. It provides this nice sort of recessed look that I like a lot. But it's possible, obviously, for that tension hoop to get too high to the point where it's interfering with the strings. So if you have a head crown that's too low, the tension hoop will tend to sit too high. If you have a head crown that's too high, then the tension hoop will sit low. It may in fact sit flush with the surface of the banjo, or even sit a little bit lower than the surface of the head, in which case that's not very aesthetically pleasing at all, at least in my opinion. If you change the crown of the head without changing anything else, without changing the tension hoop, that's going to have other consequences as well. So if you get a lower crown, head crown, and that causes the tension hoop to sit a little higher, as long as it's not in the path of the strings, that's fine. But that's also going to, since it's raising the height of the tension hoop, it's also going to raise the height of the hooks and create more distance between the top of the hook and the shoes. So the threads of the hook will not go as far through the shoes. You want to be sure that you have enough thread for the nuts to latch onto. Getting a higher crown height on your head will cause the tension hoop to sit a little lower, as long as you have enough clearance before the top of the shoes. You want to be sure that the head does not sit so low that it strikes the top of the shoes. But that's also going to cause, if you don't change the tension hoop at all, that's also going to cause the hooks to sit a little bit lower, which means the threads will protrude further through the shoes. So you want to be sure that your nuts have enough depth to them that they will in fact screw tightly onto that added thread, the additional length of thread. And these nuts here actually have open ends so that if the thread were too long, it would just project out the end of the nut, which prevents the problem of having the threads be too long. But that's also not desirable. It's not aesthetically pleasing, and those threads protruding through the nuts can catch on your clothes. It's just not very nice. So you don't want that to happen. Of course, another solution is just to replace the hooks with different length hooks, but that's additional cost and additional work, and you may not want to do that. I do notice that even with the higher crown head and even with tightening the hooks quite a lot here at the neck, this recess is still a little bit high. It's still a little bit higher than the plane of the neck, especially on the treble side, which suggests to me that this tension hoop made by Rickard Banjos was actually not correctly machined. It's been a little while since I purchased it. I don't know that I could exchange it, but I think it's going to be okay. It's even with the plane of the neck at the base end. It's a little higher than the plane of the neck at the treble end, but I think the strings are still going to clear it. It is what it is. I like the raw brass tension hoop. I like the look of it, and as long as it's not causing string buzz, that should be okay. Okay, so the banjo is now strung up and tuned up. Because the strings are brandy new, they sound really bright at the moment, but I'll show you that it did fix the problem. Even though the tension hoop is still a teeny bit high where it joins the neck on the treble end of the neck, it no longer produces the string buzz it was producing before. So starting at the 5th fret, sounds bright, but it's not producing any string buzz. And that's at the 12th fret, and I can continue. No string buzz all the way up on the treble end, and it was the treble end that had the problem. So if the first string is fine, then the rest of the strings are fine. It's the tension hoop notch is highest at the treble end, so the D string is fine, all the rest of the strings are fine, and it solved the problem, even though it wasn't quite machined right. Here's a close-up of the recess in the tension hoop where the strings pass over it, and you can see that the treble end is higher than the bass end, such that it rises above the face of the fretboard at that end only. So this is actually a defect in the tension hoop, but I compensated for it, and I can live with it. Okay, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and happy clawhammer.